Hi everybody and welcome back to the Tussle Public Sector Sales podcast. I'm Lloyd Johnson and today we're going to be talking about the Procurement Act and how it impacts suppliers and what the opportunities are for suppliers of all sizes, including small and medium-sized enterprises. Today I'm joined with Jen from Create Change, who'll be talking through this seismic shift in the way that public procurement is carried out in the UK. Jen, before we get started, would you like to introduce yourself to everyone and tell us what you do at Create Change?
Yeah, sure. So, hi guys, I'm Jen. I'm bid manager at Create Change. I've been here for 4 months now after 10 years within public sector and private sector bidding. And for me, one of the things that obviously we're going to go into a lot of detail today is the Public Procurement Act, which is something that I have been following for the past 2 years and kind of looking at some of the opportunities of how, SMEs and bigger suppliers and the public sector can work together to navigate some of those more complex changes.
So the Procurement Act is finally happening. It's set to go live on the 28th of October. So for those suppliers out there who don't know too much about the Act, can you tell us what some of the key points are, some of the key changes that people can expect?
Yeah, and obviously there are quite a few, probably more than we can get through in detail in sort of a short-term podcast. But, what the Act is aimed at doing is kind of levelling out the playing field to enable innovation in the public sector. I mean, the latest note was delivered on the Cabinet Office website that says public procurement is the biggest lever for innovation in the public sector. And this is to drive, better outcomes for the users, for taxpayers, and then also to look at removing some of the barriers to procurement that SMEs face, and this is due, in terms of time, expertise, and also the perception, a buyer's perception of smaller companies. So I think some of the things that we can look at, obviously, is the complexity of the procurement processes. Bidding takes a lot of time, and as an SME, not everybody is in the position that my company are, that they have a bid manager or a commercial team. Often it's experts that are having to deal with the barriers of delivering a service and also developing new business. And at the moment, we are confronted with probably about 70 plus procurement portals that you have to register on just to be able to pop a bid in. So one of the first things that the Act is looking at doing is simplifying and streamlining that process. And that first off will be creating a central platform where you provide your information once, and then you can use that again and again to track current opportunities and to also submit all of your bids. So you don't have to provide financial information 15 times over, which again is a time-consuming process by itself. Yeah, so talking about in terms of sort of centralisation of information at the moment, what we have got is notices obviously come through from multiple areas. So you might have a newsletter that you're subscribed to, you might get the notifications from a framework. But I mean, in my inbox on any given day, I've probably got about 18 notifications from various different portals for various different opportunities across, it's not just central government, we're talking higher education, we're talking arm's length bodies, we're talking sort of even some private sector organisations too. So to actually statistically crunch those and then put those into some kind of prioritised order in things of terms that you're, opportunities you're interested in, can be very, very difficult. So hopefully, the kind of the centralisation of that pipeline will take some of the pain out of that. Also, one of the things that we are seeing at the moment is pre-engagement is a massive, massive part of bidding. So I think it's something like 70% of contracts are won based on your relationship with the supplier. Now, with the amount of suppliers out there, the amount of incumbents, it's very, very hard to navigate those relationships and to think strategically about the organisations that you are best placed to work with. So what we currently do at the moment, any organisation, I think it's worth over 100 million, has to publish their procurement pipelines. So unless you have access to software such as Tussle that consolidates all of that nicely for you, it's actually a very lengthy process to go through all of the expiring contracts in order to get that pre-engagement in place. So what we are seeing currently, all the new regulations will instill, is that need for any procurement over 2 million must be published in a pipeline over 18 months, which should give suppliers, especially SMEs, that whole market view of activity that's coming up. So, you have an 18-month advance warning, so you can tailor your strategy accordingly and then reach out to the organisations that you think you're best placed to work with.
So building on that, Jen, how do you think the Act really changes the way that suppliers will qualify and bid on work, and how will it really change things on the ground for a supplier in terms of the new procedure that's coming in and the different kind of procedure types within the new Act?
So what we're seeing at the moment is there are currently 8 types of procedure that a buyer can go to market with, and what the Act is looking at doing is simplifying that into 2 strategic procedures. So the most one that I want to talk about today is the flexible competitive procedure. And what this does, this kind of breaks down the barriers and provides additional insight into the way that buyers can go to market. So what this is doing is, instead of being like we have a prescriptive process, what this is going to do is introduce that multi-stage process, which is very much scoped in collaboration with the buyer. So, we're going to see a lot more of preliminary market engagement, which is where instead of the buyers going out to the suppliers and saying, this is the service that we want, this is how we want you to prepare for it, what they're going to the suppliers and saying, hey, this is our problem. What are the sort of things that we can solve? How can we solve it together? What innovation can you bring? And what are your thoughts on the routes to market to enable, SMEs to also have that voice as well? I think some of the things that we've seen is obviously, as humans, we're all kind of guilty of bias. And a lot of commercial teams at the moment seem to have that onus on, although they want to involve SMEs in the procurement process, it is, you are an SME, but we want to involve you as part of an ecosystem rather than priming it in your own right. Yeah. The whole principle of the Act is to drive that innovation. And because so many SMEs are experts within their own right, what this does is open up the ground for them to have a say in, specific areas of their expertise and deliver real value and better outcomes to taxpayers.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, this whole competitive flexible procedure now. It's allowing, some of this potentially was possible before, but it's allowing buyers, it's kind of telling them more explicitly that you can be more flexible with how you go to market, you can engage suppliers earlier. I think that's a really positive message, right? It's allowing suppliers to be more involved at different stages to kind of try and help shape the right answer for contracting authority. So I think that's something a lot of people will be very happy to hear is going to take place, and clearly you feel on the ground that's going to be beneficial, right, as part of the process.
Of course it's beneficial, because I think in terms of being an SME, like I said, often you get eclipsed by the larger organisations, and I think it gives you the opportunity to, one, talk about your expertise in your own right, but also the sort of smaller partners that I work with, landing those sort of big 10, 20 million contracts isn't necessarily their priority. Their priority is making real change and creating services that have a real tangible benefit for users. It's not about the money in my in my experience. It's about creating that change for people and driving, services through that whole entire transformation process. And I think, the only way that you're going to achieve that is by a diversification strategy, which is what the Act is aimed at achieving. So it's, if you have a diverse supply chain of suppliers, you're going to unlock conversations, you're going to unlock challenge. If you buy the same service and carry on doing this, then the same problems are only going to exist, and you're not going to be any better off than you were 2 years ago.
So building on that, Jen, how specifically do you think the Act will help SMEs in particular? We've already talked about that to some extent, but do you think small businesses will benefit more from the Act than they have done to date?
100%. So one of the mandates of the Act is that it is a lever to open up the playing field to smaller businesses. So what they're saying at the moment is, in terms of the competitive procedure, doing the preliminary market engagements, is about looking at each procurement through a small business lens. So, the major changes that we're going to see is some of the barriers to procurement being removed. So currently, some of the frameworks that I'm working on, they have a 5 million or a 10 million pound insurance limit, which for some SMEs is crazy. You might be talking about paying £30,000 a year in place for a contract that you're not guaranteed you're going to win. And not many companies have that level of capital at risk. So one of the new mandates of the Act will be that insurance requirement isn't mandated until the contract has actually been awarded. So you can say that you're working towards it and you can commit to have it in place, but you don't actually have it in place until that contract is won. So you can kind of do that commitment. On the other side, we're also seeing, financial statements being moved, because not every SME is, because of their turnover, they don't have to file audited accounts. So we're going to be seeing that's removed from some of the frameworks. And also around bidding timescales as well. So we have to recognise that not every company has a massive bidding team. So I've seen, a 20,000 word bid go out where you have to respond within 2 weeks. And it's not just, a level of mandatory questions. We're talking about real deep dive questions that want you to deliver proof of concepts, want you to deliver value for money. And I think for most teams, that sort of level of response within a 2-week period, when you have to concentrate on delivery as well, is way out of scope. So therefore, because of the size of the contract, and I've worked in businesses where I've just looked at the bid and said, there is absolutely no way as 1 or 2 people we can deliver that level of response. We can't deliver the quality that we would like to. So now, that's going to be one of the requirements is, okay, according to the size of the contract, the people that might be bidding for it, we're going to lengthen the timeline accordingly.
Yeah.
And also for me, finally, the big thing is that now when you have one big contract, authorities will be required to see if there is a possibility of chunking that up into smaller lots to allow the innovation and to allow smaller businesses to compete competitively for the opportunity.
I think what's really interesting for me listening to all of that is it feels like they're practical changes, but they feel like, I don't want to say they're obvious changes, but if you've got to think a small company, I've been in that position in the previous life bidding on contracts, and like you say, just something as simple as timeframes and having sensible timeframes to respond, I think can make a massive difference. I think all of those changes as well, you feel like that if you really want to make this stuff happen and make it accessible for SMEs, those are things which procurement teams can do quite easily. So yeah, I'm excited to see this. I know a lot of our customers will be as well. Now let's talk about quite an important topic in terms of changing of some terminology. So it used to be the most economically advantageous tender, or MEAT, a bit of a mouthful, and it's now changing to MAT, right, which is most advantageous tender. Okay, how do you think that's going to change things for bidders in the process?
I think this is going to change things exponentially, not only from a horrid acronym that I absolutely hate, that reminds me in some ways of dog food, but now I think it is that important point that we were discussing earlier, sort of before we started recording the podcast. I've been working in procurement and bidding for 12 years, and back when I first started, there was that kind of mandated thing in the old Act where it is literally around quality and price. So when you're evaluating a bid, you sort of feel price is a massive component and not necessarily focusing on value for money. When we think about things like value for money, that's not just, I'm getting a contract for 20% off. It's value for money is the actual value that you're going to bring to the buyers. That might be using your expertise to upskill the existing team. It might be in terms of social value, in terms of the value that you can deliver to the local community. But in terms of how you're going to improve the outcomes to the users of the service. So what the transition to the most advantageous tender does is kind of take that focus away from price. So no longer will buyers feel that they have to focus so much on price. Now it's kind of looking through the whole lens of, innovation. So when you are looking at a contract, can we allot a certain weighting to how much innovation it's going to bring? I think, it's not actually enshrined in the Act because there's no specific mention of social value, but I think this means that social value is going to be brought forward because that's part of something that is advantageous as a taxpayer. The sorts of services that we're talking about procuring are probably, those larger scale government contracts, or sort of things at like a discovery and alpha stage that is still going to have an impact on people that use the services. So it's about thinking, the ways in which the contractor can deliver significant social value. So whether that's through offering apprenticeships, ensuring, a responsible supply chain, prompt payment codes. So it's taking that focus away from price. Like I said, I used to see sort of 50-60% focus on price regularly, which is a lot.
Wow.
And now we've kind of got down to that 40% stage. But I think in large-scale transformation programs especially, the focus needs to be away from the price and more on the quality and innovation that your experts are delivering, because you cannot get an expert service at 40% of the price because you're doing that at the expense of quality. And then, the next time that you procure, you're still going to be going through the same problems because you haven't got the expertise to deliver the transformation needed.
So now we've covered off the changes to MEAT and MAT. Next, let's talk about something we'd spoken about beforehand, and that's this apparent kind of disconnect between the way that commercial teams, procurement and commercial teams are kind of getting ready for the Act and what you're seeing so far versus subject matter experts and people who might be on the bid evaluation panels like business owners and things like that. Tell us a bit about what you're seeing so far as we kind of lead up to the Act coming into effect.
So actually, there's been quite a lot of preparation that's been done in terms of, I think, the intention to prepare people for the Act and, the changes, because it's not just a mandated change, it also requires a behavioural change as well. So, in terms of good resources, I think we were talking earlier about the fact that the CCS have announced knowledge drops, and that's focused on, the modules for the contracting authorities. There's specific drops on there for suppliers, and then there's also kind of modules aimed at SMEs. These are all bite-sized, they're all available on YouTube, and some of them are only 15 minutes at a time. But I think despite the communications that have gone out, and despite, the fact that it's been covered over LinkedIn, it's been covered in various topics, there is a real discord in terms of, what the Act actually entails, how you're going to prepare for it, and the level of knowledge. Several events that I've been to, for example, one a couple of months ago, I was at GovCamp. I met some amazing people, and that was from both the buyer and supplier side, and also some commercial teams as well. And we sort of did sort of a hack and a module around avoiding the post office scandal, which I know is very topical at the moment. And a lot of that, we were talking about procurement rules and transparency. So one of the things when we're going around the room, I sort of said, well, hey, this is what, the new Procurement Act is aimed at kind of breaking down, is the fact that you don't get stuff awarded just to one supplier, the fact that you get to diversify your supply chain, you get to engage with smaller companies. So then, and again, I think Carillion, they had lots of massive contracts that were awarded to them at massive risk, and when they dropped, there was nobody to carry on that service. So what, having that kind of broad and diverse supply chain does is remove some of that risk. And around the room, there was almost silence. Everybody had heard of the Procurement Act, but they weren't sure on, when it's going to be announced, what it was actually going to entail, and there were lots of different interpretations. Now, when we're looking at buyer panels, it's not just the commercial team that you need to engage, it's obviously the people, like you said, that own the service, so your product owners, your service owners, and also people from policy as well. So I think to embody and to really ensure that the Act is enacted, it's making sure that everybody is aware on what the Act is trying to achieve and putting the mechanisms and the behavioural changes in place to ensure that that's fulfilled. So like I said, although that the information is out there, and I think we've just seen the new procurement drops, again, they've been released this month in advance of the October deadline, there is still kind of that real grey area of how do we achieve this? And how do you shift that mindset from, again, I'm a commercial team, I want to achieve that value for money, I also want to achieve that lower price weighting, I want to involve SMEs, but I don't want to have the risk of having to engage with multiple small suppliers. So I think it's about de-risking, proportionality, and about suppliers and buyers working on that journey together to think about what they can learn from each other. Because, like we said, what we're going to see is that kind of preliminary process. I think, there's also going to be massive changes to the way that tenders are run. So within the flexible competitive procedure, it's not just going to be, one stage. You might see multiple stages where you have a written tender, but then you also have an active proof of concept that's going to be evaluated alongside it. So how, one, from a supplier side, do you transition to that approach where you're having to spend more time sort of developing something and you're not reliant on your commercial team anymore? And then from a commercial perspective, how do you evaluate that, and how do you manage equality and transparency at all stages of the process? So
there's a lot of change there, isn't there? I think on both sides, and you think how long the kind of current regulations have been in place for. There's a huge amount of change and kind of education that's needed to make sure not just commercial teams, but everybody in contracting authorities really knows how to get the best out of the new regime as well. Not just kind of complying with it, but actually trying to get the benefit that everybody kind of had in mind when it was put in place. There's going to be a long process of education and everything.
It is going to be a long process, and although, like we said, it comes into play in October, already I've seen sort of those pre-market engagement sessions being run much more tightly. There's more kind of onus on having that supplier voice and contributing to the routes that the procurement is released through, or what the scope of the procurement's going to look like, which is really good. These are all encouraging signs. From my perspective, what I'm still not seeing is that kind of breakdown in the barrier between your big supplier and your SME. What I'm seeing at the moment is still the SME being considered as, we want you but part of an ecosystem, and the prime supplier still being in place to deliver those huge contracts. So I think to kind of have that whole scale change where we can have real specific experts in their field delivering the larger contracts, I think that's probably, maybe 2 to 3 years away. And I think what it takes is for one procurement to be successful, and then for that to be used as the benchmark. And once you've done one, then I think naturally it becomes like a progression, and then everybody wants to learn from that one case study. But I think there is a lot of, there's a lot of work to do. And the only way that we can do that is by working together with suppliers and commercial teams. At the moment, there is kind of that us and them culture. And I think, hopefully what the Act is going to do is break down some of those barriers where people think, oh God, there's procurement coming out, I can't speak to that person. now the rules make it quite clear and give you clarity on at what stage you can speak to people, and some of the rules have been relaxed to allow that communication. So to allow, both suppliers and commercial teams to learn from each other.
We've covered quite a bit about the Act in general, but what aspect of the reforms excite you the most, and what do you think is going to have kind of the most positive impact on public procurement across all the changes that are coming in?
For me, it's absolutely the innovation. It's the opportunity for SMEs to hopefully be on the level playing field with the larger suppliers. It's about, building relationships with supplier teams, having the ability to make real meaningful change for the public, because I think at the moment, services can stagnate. There's a lot of procurements where we've seen that they've been sort of abandoned halfway through the process, or, procurements have just failed because the services haven't met the level of delivery standards that they should do, and it's a massive waste of money. So for me, it's that ability to collaborate, to work together, to drive reform, to drive change, and to make more use of the rules as a vehicle to have a positive impact on people's lives. I think one of the things that we probably touched on earlier was around social values. It's one of the only features from the previous acts that's not actually enshrined in law within the new Public Procurement Act. It's kind of implied. Ministers are very good at saying this act is for the public benefit, but there's not actually anything apart from going along the lines of the most advantageous tender that encapsulates that. So for me, that's an area that I don't want to lose momentum, because I think the ability for companies to genuinely not just make a commercial profit is really, really important. I think, we need to look at the value that we can deliver in terms of apprenticeships, in terms of creating new opportunities, and in terms of really driving, outcomes for local communities as well. Those are probably sort of some of the key aspects.
And maybe social values, the answer to this, but are there areas of the reforms that you think could have gone further? Is there any kind of missed opportunities that you can see where you're saying, I wish I would have seen a bit more of this? I mean, we talked about social value already, but is that the main one, or are there other areas you think could have gone further on as well?
I think at the moment it's hard to tell, because the Act still isn't active yet. So I think the intentions are there, especially, like I said, around the SME, the fact that the barriers are being dropped, but it's not just the Act itself, it's how it's delivered, and it's how people comply and how organisations comply with that kind of guidance. And that's going to be something that only time can tell in terms of there being missed opportunities. So I think for me, it's more of a watch and wait and see what happens. But I think all of the intention is there. It's just kind of how do we facilitate that behavioural change to make sure that it's adhered to and that we make the best of it.
And finally, Jen, what would be your piece of advice about any incumbent suppliers or people who want to get into the market in terms of making the most of the Procurement Act? What's your kind of takeaway for them, and how to approach things when the Act comes into force?
It's going to be the old adage. It's going to be ready. It's take advantage of the knowledge drops, take advantage of articles, take advantage of speaking to commercial teams and saying, hey, this is something that we know is coming into force in October. How can we work with you to better deliver and better partner to make sure that the true value and the true intentions of the Act are delivered? I think it's always about making the time and making sure that you've got the capacity to do the research in terms of looking at the pipeline, to make sure that you've also got the capacity to be able to participate in knowledge exchange almost. So when we're talking about, the opportunity to co-develop, co-design and take part in some of those innovation programs and pre-market engagements, it's, at the moment, if a pre-market engagement comes out, sometimes there's not time to attend the session, but it's very, very important to make sure that you're there, you're participating, and you're constantly giving feedback, and that you're also listening to the supplier side of things as well. And also, don't be scared to challenge. If you feel something's not right, or you feel that you've got an alternative solution, show it, show your hand. And learn how you can work together to improve those outcomes for the public in the future.
Yeah, I think that's exciting. It sounds exciting when you're talking about suppliers being involved earlier on in different stages, kind of taking a fresh look at how they can be involved in shaping the procurement process and the outcomes. Really, really interesting stuff. So thank you, Jen, for coming in and talking to us today. If anybody wants to find out more about Create Change and what you do, what should they do?
Well, you can drop a line to me. So Jenna.Flower at createchange.io. We're on multiple frameworks. So we're on GCloud 13 and currently preparing for GCloud 14, which as always is a lot of fun. But our website has some great case studies that you can look at, and that's www.createchange.io. or alternatively, reach out to us on LinkedIn. We love talking to new people, and we love kind of learning about new partnership opportunities and, ways we can work with people to drive transformation and innovation in the public sector.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Jen.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to see more of these podcasts, head over to our YouTube channel and subscribe. And if you want to learn more about Tussle or any of our latest analysis, head over to tussle.com. Thank you very much for listening.